Hi, and welcome back to the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc. Today, we're happy to welcome Alan, partner at Antler, a global early-stage VC active in the major startup ecosystems across 6 continents. Alan has an extensive experience in building and scaling technology businesses. He was previously MD and co-founder at Westwing, a home and living e-commerce company and one of Europe's few e-commerce IPOs of the past years. Before Westwing, he built the software development hub at Rocket Internet and was CEO of a SEA e-commerce company, along with working for a VC and starting his own company in Spain. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the follow button, giving us a review, and following the European VC on LinkedIn. Vaban, a Qatar company, is the easiest way to launch and run your venture investing. An all-in-one integrated solution to form syndicates, VC funds, and co-investment SPV programs built for scale. Supporting the next generation of global ventures from fundraising to exits, Vaban provides an automated back office, allowing their clients to focus on what matters, finding the next unicorn and building their network. Vaban has facilitated over $1 billion of capital invested in companies such as Revolut, Bolt, and Airbnb. To learn more, please reach out at vaban.io/EUVC. And don't forget to mention EUVC. The 15th of December is the day you need to have in mind. EUVC is hosting a webinar with Kathy, David, and Andreas. Kathy will show us how to approach PR as an individual and as a firm. Sign up at eu.vc/events.
Alan, welcome to this special episode of the European VC. And I say special episode because this one is straight from Andreas Munkholm's bed. I'm kidding. Andreas is a bit sick, Alan, but we are fully dedicated to this. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I love the dedication.
You'll never stop the hustle, guys.
Exactly.
And the cherry on top of it is that our podcast producer told us that the sound from Andreas's bed is actually better from his home office. So from now on, I think we're going to make it a tradition. Andreas, what do you think about that one?
I think it's the
Sounds
best
terrible. Sounds like incredibly hard work.
Yeah, but I think it's the best idea ever, actually.
Ever, yeah, exactly. Well, it will be good to cater to the US recordings at very late hours. Moving on. Before we start, Alan, I want to take the time to hear a bit about you. You've got a really interesting background from my perspective, at least. First of all, you founded Westwing, a home and living e-commerce company with more than 1,000 employees and 500 million euros in revenue. But you're also part of the Rocket Internet team, which many of our listeners certainly know of, which I can only imagine has been quite interesting as an experience. Tell us more. What made you who you are today?
To say the least. Yeah, so I'm originally German, with the first name that confuses the hell out of people because it's the first name. Was born in the UK, but by background, I'm a founder much more than I'm an investor. I've been in this whole startup circus for 15 years. I think like many people back then, there was no master plan to get into this. It just sort of slid into it. I actually started out on the investing side. My first job was with a Spanish VC. They don't exist anymore. And back then, I actually saw myself. I'll never want to be an investor again. I felt very drawn to the operational side. Felt that that's where my sweet spot. Felt that the people that actually build shit get to have all the fun. So started my first company in 2009 in Spain. Raised for what was then a lot of money, and not terribly surprisingly, crashed and burned spectacularly after about a year and a half. After which I did indeed join the early famous, infamous Rocket Internet core crew. Did a lot of stuff there. I think like many people, a lot of e-commerce topics. My functional spike lies on the product and tech side, so I ended up setting up a lot of what was Rocket's technology and product organization back in the days, with some crazy stories that we can talk another day about over a few beers. But ended up then starting my second company, which then Rocket was an investor in, which was an e-commerce in Southeast Asia. Again, a learning experience, to put it positively. Got some good early traction, scaled it to a couple of hundred people relatively quickly, but very classically never got the unit economics right. So ultimately, that came to an end as well. And then indeed was part of a team building company called Westwing, e-commerce out of Munich, selling home and living products, anything from sofas to scented candles in most major markets in Europe, except for the UK and the Nordics. That was quite the ride. Lots of ups, almost more downs, but ultimately went through an IPO 4 years ago, and then post IPO for me personally felt again more drawn to the early stages. And kind of when a company gets to a certain size, you spend kind of the nature of what you do doesn't become any less challenging. I think quite the reverse, but it's very different. And we got lucky in the sense that we had quite the entrepreneurial culture at Westwing, and kind of saw this microcosm of the ecosystem flywheel really in action. We had a lot of early employees and people who went out to start their own companies. A number of them have built by now vastly more successful companies than Westwing ever was. So Eric from Scalable Capital used to run our German business. One of the Personio founders was in our team. A number of really great people that went through Westwing at one point or another. And there I really got onto the kind of back into the early stages, looking at other people building their companies, supporting from the sidelines, and then quite naturally a couple of years ago, switch sides and really doubled down in what I see as kind of almost the institutionalization of the friends and family angel investing. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, I gather.
Yeah, exactly. You dropped a little nuggets there that we will definitely want to kind of extract value from. I have a more personal one to ask before we go into the topics, which is, you in the beginning you started by saying that in your early stages of your career you thought, I never want to be an investor again. And here we are, I don't know how many years later, let's not say it, but here you are as a fucking investor, right? So I'd love to ask you, what was the thought process back then, and now if you contrast it to what you've learned in your experience, why does it make sense for you to actually be an investor, right?
So I think, to be honest, I'd be a horrible late stage investor, quite frankly. I'm a borderline introvert. Playing the networking game isn't my thing. I love going deep. I tend to be very operational. And so for me, really the insight that changed was the nature of the stage with what we do at Antler. Really that kind of, I think when you're that first angel investor in a company and you're kind of almost that extension of the founder team, you're their early sparings partner, you go deep for hours at a time on a specific topic. I think it's a very, very different nature of what you do in the day-to-day than in later stage investing. And I think that's the insight that for me opened that door again, because for me, after Westwing, my initial deal thought was, hell, I'm going to build another company.
Andreas, anything you were unmuted a second ago?
Yeah, so what I was about to ask was if you could just unpack the Antler model a bit, because we've got a series of investors coming on from Antler, so I'd love to hear if you could unpack the whole Antler model and also say, how does Antler Berlin fit into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the Antler model, the way we think about Antler is we call it a day zero investor. So we really think of it as the institutionalization of that friends and family angel investment at the very core of what we do. We then kind of stack a lot of other things on top, but that's the core, that's the nucleus, that's what we're, I think, pretty reasonably good at. The kind of where so in most of the companies that we invest in, we are the first investor, and it really comes from that observation that kind of similarly to what I saw at Westwing, but also kind of a lot of other people on the Antler team have very similar backgrounds, where we saw that early employees, founders, kind of at that very, very early stage had the same challenges, that there is a lot of entrepreneurial talent that comes out of that startup ecosystem, that at the same time that highly involved, very early angel support system traditionally doesn't scale, or nobody has been really able to get it to scale at a global level. So it's quite the white space. So going a little bit into those challenges at the founder level. So one of the key insight was that a lot of the really good people when thinking about starting their company or starting the next company, struggle with that question of where do I find my co-founder? And ironically, the better and more experienced people are, often the harder that becomes. Because as we go up the pyramid, you want to found with somebody who is at eye level. Kind of as you go up the pyramid, that peer group shrinks. Our networks become more homogenous. And the 3-4 people that we've worked with in the past that are really good, they tend to be busiest and not available. So if kind of a lot of really great people are looking for potential co-founders because they decide they don't want to build on their own, I can totally relate to that. I swore to myself after the first experience, I'd never want to build a company on my own. So where do I then, if I don't have that person in my first degree, very close personal network or people that I've worked with in the past, how do I find a co-founder? And then it becomes a shit show, because being introduced at some event or through somebody, we have coffee together, we have a beer together, and then that was nice. We spent 2 afternoons on a whiteboard together. That's no basis for taking a decision that for the next 10 years, we're going to build something like an old married couple together, right? So then again, we observed that a lot of teams then really struggle after that, and kind of teams fall apart, and some really good people don't get going or fail early on because of that topic. We all know people in our networks who would be awesome founders, but they say, you know what, I just don't have the team, or I don't have the idea. So that's kind of one of the key insights. The second one is then that kind of as an early angel investor, you can have, I think, an incredible impact on an early business. I think much more than in many cases in later stage investor. Kind of that one core warm introduction in the first 12, 18 months can make all the difference to a company. If it's kind of the key hire, if it's the introduction to a co-founder, if it is that first investor, if it's an introduction to the first customer. At Series B, an introduction for kind of your next VP hire or C-level hire is awesome from your investor, but it doesn't change your trajectory completely. At the same time, as an angel, most angels, kind of, you're a one-man show. There's kind of so much that potentially you could give in terms of value add, but as a one-man show, you are not a functional expert in everything. I certainly am not. There's a few areas where I'm reasonably good at. There's a ton of areas where I'm not good at. The same for kind of opening network. So the idea behind Antler is to really institutionalize that and to set ourselves up in a way where we can holistically on the both being that sparrings partner, being close, but also the opening of network, plus support people in a structured format on how to find their co-founders, and really rethink getting that friends and family angel investment stage to scale. And I think we figured out a model. We started that less than 5 years ago, and we can talk a little bit about the scale that we've reached in a moment. But I think we've really kind of gotten elements of that to scale.
I think, Alan, it would be cool if you'd go into that now and say, what is the scale, and also if you could kind of contrast the support system that Antler brings and compare that to what you experienced with Rocket Internet and what you're seeing with, in Entrepreneur First, and also we're seeing founder-led syndicates that kind of tries to bring together a group of investors, around the founder, but where it's the founder that really takes the initiative to it. So I'd love to hear you, contrasting these models as well. But feel free to start with saying exactly what is it, the support system that you now have built with Antler.
Yeah, so happy to. So with Antler, we're operating with local teams in 25 locations around the globe. We, by now, every year get over 60,000 applications of founders that want to join some of our cohorts, out of which we then end up taking 1% to 2%. We are truly global, so kind of we're present in all the major ecosystems for now, except China. Around the world, I think this year alone, we'll invest into some 300 companies that wouldn't exist without us. And the kind of, when I think about kind of how is it different from other models, I think there's different archetypes. On the one hand, you have going back to the Rocket model, you have kind of the incubators, venture builders of this world. And I mean, all these terms are fluffy and each ecosystem uses them somewhat differently. But what I'm thinking about is the models that where you have a highly involved investor that typically recruits founders to run businesses and often in their own ideas and takes a big chunk of the cap table in many cases. Certainly having been a founder with Rocket, I can tell you that was the case. Our philosophy there is the inverse. So we support founders to build their own ideas, and we can talk about kind of why we're not a hypothesis-driven investor in a moment. And we help them sharpen their own ideas, and we support them in building their own. We look to invest in strong founder-led companies. We're a very clear minority investor who takes everywhere we operate around about a 10%. So kind of very, very clear. It's a larger angel ticket. Very clearly, we're the minority investor. We don't tell founders how to run their business. We're never going to fire a founder. That's kind of not our place and not something that we want to do. And we look to stay minority investors over the duration of how we work with companies. So I think that's the venture builder incubator type world. Then you have the classic accelerators, YC being the biggest kid on the block. I think those are clearly a step and a half later than us. So we have a large number of companies that have gone through Antler that have afterwards gone on into Y Combinator. But typically those start at the moment where there is already a team, there's some semblance of product, often some semblance of traction, and then the accelerators kind of get involved and do what the name says, accelerate what is already there. We actually start with working with founders really at day zero, in many cases before they've even started to found their company. So I think there's the stage difference. And then in how we work with founders, when I talk to founders that have gone through Antler and gone on to YC, for example, the way in which we work with the founders is extremely different. So YC is very heavy on world-class content, one-to-many formats, and then a world-class network on top. And obviously all the signaling effect and all the positive things that brings with it. Our approach with working with founders is very different in the sense that we hold next to no one-to-many formats. We're not a startup school. Also, the founders that come and work with us, they're far too experienced for me to be telling them, hey, and holding a keynote on these are the 25 best practices to writing the perfect business plan. I think that's completely redundant generic information. And if somebody's looking for that, there's a ton of people who can do that way better than me on YouTube. But kind of our model is far more individual with the founders. So if a founder is, or a team is then kind of going deep into, okay, this is our product roadmap. How fast do we want to scale, ramp up the burn? How conservative do we want to be? At what traction milestone should we go out fundraise? I think those are very, very individual discussions. That's not one size fits all. And I'd much rather spend 4 hours with an individual team and discuss on their specific topic, or somebody else who may in that case know more than I do. So I think those are the key differences in how I look at how we do things differently from the key archetypes in terms of incubators and accelerators. And then in terms of kind of the angel syndicates, I think many players that do awesome stuff, and we actually work with a lot of them. In many cases, they actually come and invest into companies that come through Antler. I think we just do this at a somewhat larger scale, with kind of truly global network and resources behind it that I think allow us to do a few more things.
Yeah. I have to ask, not that I want you to speak shit of them because I love them, but I'm really curious to understand the differences, because I actually do not know. When you look at what Antler's doing and Entrepreneur First is doing, it feels like you're working at very much the same stage, right? It feels like you're very much catering to similar profiles, but I might be wrong there because I've never seen the models from the inside. Would you have any insights on what's best suited for who from that perspective?
To be honest, Entrepreneur First is the one player that works in a relatively similar model. I think they're awesome. They do a lot of great stuff. There's a number of tactical differences of how they operate that are somewhat different. They are slightly more heavy on people who come straight out of academia with kind of great technologies looking for an application. They are maybe a little bit more formulistic in how they think about founder composition. They have a different geographic footprint where we by now they're much older than we are, but we have outscaled them very, very significantly. But I think ultimately when founders ask me at the end of the day, who to work with, I always tell them, look at the people. Right? Kind of these. We're a long-term investor. If you want to work with me, then I'm going to be on your cap table and working closely with you for 10 plus years. Talk to the people and figure out who you want to work with. And I think there we've done something that we can also talk about in a moment. Kind of, we've taken a very deliberate decision to set ourselves up with critical mass in each of the ecosystems that we work in, and deeply embed ourselves, because we fundamentally believe that a lot of the very early stage support
I'd love to dive into the statement that you did, that we're not a hypothesis-driven investor. I'd love to unpack that because there's strong reasons to be, and there's also strong reasons not to be. It just affects the operational model of the firm a lot.
So I think it's a luxury of our model that, given the stage that we invest at, so we all know those kind of these kind of when you're a friend and family angel investor, you sometimes invest in a former colleague just because that person is awesome, right? And you don't understand what the hell they are planning to build, but you just know that person so well that you think, okay, whatever that person is building, I'm going to bet on that person. They'll have understood the space. They'll have understood kind of the business model, etc. And that's the stage that we operate at. So when we think about investment, so we initially get these thousands of applications per what we call kind of cohorts that we bring together of 50, 60, 70, 80 founders. We get thousands of applications and we interview them. And we interview them on intrinsics. So I talk very, very little about ideas with these people, and I talk mostly about the people. And I try to understand what have they done, and kind of a lot of the intrinsics of what we believe makes great founders. And a lot of these people come from very unobvious spaces. And that's part of the beauty of the model that we have, that some of the best investments that we've made, I think that kind of that hypothesis-driven we would have never thought about. It's because a founder comes in with 12 years domain expertise in a specific area, has awesome network, has an insight, and brings that in, and we realize this is an awesome person. And then we bring these people in to our cohorts, and then we work with them for 10 weeks, and only then do we invest. So we actually have them physically, in Berlin, I have them physically for 10 weeks in the office. Means I have 400 hours of due diligence that I spend with them. I actually work with them on the whiteboard, and that's the basis of my investment. So I can actually truly make those talent investments, which allows me to not have to go out with kind of sector, technology, or trend bets or hypotheses.
I'm sitting here, Alan, with like 3 different possible questions and realizing, fuck, we don't have time. So I'm choosing my words and questions very carefully. And I want to do a more provocative one, right? Because it's just more interesting for everyone listening in. No, don't be. Now, you said a couple of times when talking about the profile of founders you're looking for, that you target, that you like to back, and everything around the model. Sentences that make me kind of think in my mind, okay, is the focus serial entrepreneurs? Is that really it? Yes or no? So I'd love you to answer that, but I also love to ask you a provocative question, which is, there's a lot of data out there that we've actually commented in other shows about, serial entrepreneurs. Do they raise more money? Do they raise at higher valuations? Typically, yes, right? All of that. I've never seen data on return profiles, and it really pisses me off. So first question is that like the type of profile that you guys at Antler love? Yes, no, not necessarily. And then, do you have any data points on the return profile of backing serial entrepreneurs, or is it just a great way to get hyped up valuations that don't convert into results?
I think the answer is unfortunately it depends. So on average, the people that join an Antler cohort have globally around about 12 years work experience. So it's on average not your recent university graduates. Over half of the people that join have founded companies before. Some of them exited, some of them failed. However, the variance is huge. So I have people in here with a couple of years work experience, because we all know plenty of examples of companies where people with no work experience have built really great companies. And then I have also people with 25 years work experience who kind of join an Antler cohort. And we we look a lot at data. I mean, we can operate at a scale, I think, in terms of like the number of profiles that we see, the number of investments we make. I think there's few people that operate at that scale. The problem with looking at data is we're all in the business of looking for outliers, right? So that by definition, you need to be really careful with data that you don't optimize for averages, because then you can kill your outliers in there. So when we think about serial entrepreneurs, not serial entrepreneurs, I mean, obviously taking in founders who have founded before, that's tremendous experience advantage. I think it also is fact that these founders, I think, especially in the first couple of years, when it's all about kind of the further funding that you get is all on team or largely on team. Serial entrepreneurs just have a huge leg up, which kind of, if you look full start to end, serial entrepreneurs versus non-serial entrepreneurs, obviously means their chances of succeeding are significantly higher. Now, what does that mean for the early stage returns? I think is a very, very different question. I don't have the answer, quite frankly. I don't have a good statistic. I know that we take profiles from both buckets.
And I'll just say, anyone listening in that has any interesting data on the topic, we'd love to look at it. I'm sure Alan would also love to receive it and look at it very critically. But moving on, Andreas, we're running a bit out of time. Is there any
Alan, I'd maybe just ask you if you could dive a bit into the multiplier effect and the flywheel of serial entrepreneurs, because I know that that's a topic that's very close to our heart, and it's tied also to the opening story that we had with Westwing. So I'd love to just hear you lay out that story a bit for us.
Yeah, I think it's one that is very, very, very apparent, that kind of that flywheel of where it kind of people who have worked early on or been part of the journey of a very successful company see how it's done, but I think role models play a huge role, kind of seeing that it's doable. So kind of then go out, start their own companies, and do so successfully. And this becomes this whole self-compounding effect in ecosystems. I think we've seen this over and over around the world. What I find super fascinating about these flywheel effects is how localized they are to some extent. So how they happen within specific ecosystems. So how all of a sudden kind of it starts spinning with graduates from a specific university, because already at undergrad level, people all of a sudden see, lots of people who've done exactly what I've done have been successful entrepreneurs. They all of a sudden graduate into this whole network of funding, support, expertise, and how other areas are completely untouched by that, and kind of how different maturities of this flywheel really determine our pace of innovation, and to some extent, kind of I think the success and growth of our economies. I'm super fascinated. We do a ton of stuff on this.
And Alan didn't say this, but Alan has actually put out a good article on this where he dives in on some of the data behind what he has seen in Berlin. So I think that anyone hearing this and thinking this is a topic of interest, they should definitely go out and check that article out.
Yeah, we've done a bigger study on kind of the wider regional ecosystem, and I've done kind of a spotlight study on actually our own Westwing alumni. When I looked at it for the 10-year anniversary since Westwing founding, by then the multiplier effect was roughly 4 to 5x. So founders that had graduated out of Westwing had raised 4 to 5x the amount of capital that we had ever raised at Westwing. They were at that point employing 5 times the amount of people that we were employing at Westwing. Kind of that number has shot up in the last 2 years since I pulled those numbers. So I think that's super fascinating, and makes me, despite everything that is going on in the current ecosystem environment, makes me a fundamental optimist, because I think those forces, that fundamental shift is not going away, and that undercurrent is staying.
And I think it's actually a really important topic, right? Because it also impacts policy, right? And it really goes to show the impact of what venture, which ends up being a small industry after all, right? But the impact of venture, especially the early stage venture, can have in these ecosystems. And me coming from Lisbon, right, I've seen it firsthand. I don't have the data, but I've seen it firsthand where we had very little entrepreneurial activity, and now we're having these, this first generation of founders. Some of them now raising funds, some of them doing a second, third venture, and that's exactly what you're describing, but just in a different ecosystem. So it's really important to shed light, and I'm really happy you have that data. So I'd invite everyone to check it out. Where can they find it, Alan? Is it available on your LinkedIn? On
my LinkedIn. On my LinkedIn, I'll pin it up on my LinkedIn to the front so that people find it easily.
Beautiful. Alan, before finishing this off with a quick fire round, I want to give you enough time because we spoke a lot about the Antler model. But there's the Antler model, the Antler ecosystem, and then there's Antler Berlin, right? And I want to give you the time to talk about Antler Berlin specifically and what should people know about it, and anyone listening in interested, what could they and should
they do? To be honest, I'd tell people don't focus on a specific Antler location. At the end of the day, we are a global institution. So we work in all of these different ecosystems. We have set ourselves up in ways that we are deeply embedded in the local ecosystem. So also when we talk about fund structuring, for example, we have decided to build regionally ring-fenced super early stage funds with probably atypical LP structures where there are a lot of angels, a lot of founders, etc., kind of to multiply our network and also kind of what we can bring to bear on behalf of our founders in each of the local ecosystems. But at the end of the day, we are a global firm, we're a global partnership, and part of what we offer and our value promise to founders is that they enter a truly global community with a global platform behind it. So that some of the companies that we've invested in here from Berlin in the last year, they just spent significant time with some of my partner colleagues over in the US as they were over there in fundraising. I've been helping a number of US companies very actively in the market entry into the European markets. I think that's ultimately we're one.
On that note, Alan, we always end the episodes with a quick fire round. Quick fire round is when I ask you quick answer questions, 30 to 60 seconds each. Are you ready?
I hope I am.
First question. Alan, what areas excite you the most in venture, of course, but that you find other people around you not really that excited about?
I think, to be honest, what I found almost counterintuitive in when entering venture is the fact that we talked about these flywheels, how incredibly localized they are, and how much, to some extent, the venture industry is inward looking. No matter how you look at the data, whenever you talk to an early stage investor, ask them kind of what's the share of deals that you do that don't come through warm intros, right? It's absolutely tiny. So the kind of what excites me are also the talent opportunities outside of the traditional networks, because there's world-class talent, world-class entrepreneurial talent and opportunities that in our hype-driven venture ecosystem where people have to work thesis-driven, where people have to work on their networks, just kind of don't come to bear. And that's something that really excites me about how we are able to work with founders, that we can actually pull these into and enable them in the established venture ecosystem.
I love how you literally answered two of the quickfire questions in one without realizing it. So you just botched my section. Anyway, second question of the quickfire round. What are your top tips for emerging VCs who are fundraising?
I think there's two tips that I would give, acknowledging that I sure don't have the ultimate wisdom on this, but kind of the two things that come to mind are number one, be differentiated. And have a clear story. I think there is so many ultimately undifferentiated funds that have very, very, very similar storylines. And the VC also return distribution is also a power law distribution where kind of few funds accumulate a lot of the returns in the entire industry. I think you need to be differentiated and you need to be able to tell that differentiated story. And second, I think you need to be ready to work really bloody hard. I think for a number of reasons. On the one hand, kind of established players have a lot of flywheel powers in their own favor. So you need to be faster. You need to go the extra mile. And also, I see a number of people who kind of get into VC or get into investing after having worked really hard, after having been really successful, and see this kind of as the cushioning out at the end of their career. I think if you want to be successful in this, it is bloody hard work, and it's not a hobby.
Alan, it's really interesting that you bring up that point, because we've been hammering down a bit that message in recent months, right? About, are there too many GPs and emerging aspiring GPs out there? Are there too little? What do you think about it? And exactly on the point that you said, the 2 points you bring up, right? It's about differentiation. You have to be highly differentiated, and it's not a fucking hobby. It's not a way to retire, right? And I think Europe has suffered a bit from that in the early days of venture, and I just hope that we can kill that. You want to comment on that?
I think ultimately, at the end of the day, since this is a flywheel, every actor that comes to play is ultimately net positive on the ecosystem. And I also don't want to come across as too negative. I think the vast majority are really, really good people. And I think in the last, especially 5 years, the VC industry has matured a lot here in Europe, and kind of a lot of firms have become more professional, and new really good players have come up. But I think there is also that flip side, and that is still quite apparent.
Yeah. Alan, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I know we've been trying to set this up for over a year, and I'm so glad it finally happened. Huge fan of the work that you're doing, and I think great kind of the demystification that you bring into the VC ecosystem, the transparency that you're really creating in a very oblique industry. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc. Vauban, a Qatar company, is the easiest way to launch and run your venture investing. An all-in-one integrated solution to form syndicates, VC funds, and co-investment SPV programs built for scale. Supporting the next generation of global ventures from fundraising to exits, Vauban provides an automated back office, allowing their clients to focus on what matters, finding the next unicorn and building their network. Vauban has facilitated over $1 billion of capital invested in companies such as Revolut, Bolt, and Airbnb. To learn more, please reach out at vauban.io/EUVC. And don't forget to mention EUVC. The 15th of December is the day you need to have in mind. EUVC is hosting a webinar with Kathy, David, and Andreas. Kathy will show us how to approach PR as an individual and as a firm. Sign up at eu.vc/events.